Hello and welcome to a tutorial on launching an AWS instance as part of the MicroMasters in IoT. In this session we'll be looking at how we do the launching of instances in AWS. This will be similar in any cloud service that you look at, but for these purposes we'll just look at the AWS version. The steps involved are choosing the machine image, so which software we'll be using. Then looking at the instance options, so what hardware are we virtualizing there, configuring the instance, so are there any special settings that we'll use, adding storage if required, there's some default storage that's given, and then adding tags to identify our different instances. We can also configure security groups, so how do we want to access the image, and that's a very important part of the process. Then we can launch our instance. In that we'll set up our access keys, and that's how we interact with our instance without having to use usernames and passwords, and then we'll be able to connect to our instance. Looking at the console in AWS, so I'll assume that you've got an AWS account, which does allow you to have free tier services, but you might have to put a credit card in. We have some other options, hopefully we'll provide going forward and provide information about that for our students. Alright, so on this window you can see that we've got a couple of running instances, we've got snapshots that we've taken, we have some key pairs that we're using for access, and we can look at all of that information on the dashboard. If we want to set up a new instance, we need to go to Launch Instance, and we go into a wizard taking us through the steps for launching instances. So our first step is to choose the machine image. If we scroll down, we've got quite a few options here, and you can see that some of them are free tier eligible, and if we scroll down a bit further we can see that some that aren't. They've got more specific setups of software stack included, and you can see a few more down there. If you look at something like Windows, you've got a few Windows options that are free tier, but other ones that you would have to pay for the licensing. Okay, so we're going to start with an Ubuntu server. So this is 18.4. If we just select that, we'll be using that image, and that'll be like the installation disks that are used on our virtual machine. We can then look at what sort of instance we want to use, and that looks at how many CPUs we'll have, virtual CPUs, how much memory, and what sort of network performance we can expect. You can see there's quite a few options here, and as you go higher they're going to cost more, but looking at the ones that are available on the free tier, we've got just this one here, which is the T2 Micro. So for the first 12 months after your sign up you get 750 hours using these instances. Okay, so we could jump to review and launch at this point, but we may have other configuration that we want to do. So we can configure the instances, and this might be where we say we want to have 20 instances launched at once with the same specifications, but we'll switch that back to 1. This is also where you can say what subnets that your systems will work on and how they will interact with each other, and you might have IP preferences as well. Step 4 is looking at adding storage, and we could add additional storage that is perhaps across all of our instances in this space, and then be adding that to our costs as well. And in this case we won't be doing that. And we can add some tags. So our new instance, if we've got multiple instances, we might want to be able to identify them easily. So if we add a tag, so we'll give this one a name, so that's the type of tag we're looking at, and we can call it IoT Test Server 3 because I already have a few here. So we can look at having this instance being easily identified as different to the other ones that I've already set up. So now that we have our tags, we can look at the security groups, and this is one of the most important parts of the setup. We could select from existing ones that we've done before. That's a good idea. If you have many systems that you're setting up, you would set up a profile of what your security groups would be for different types of systems. In this case we'll set up a new one, and we'll call it IoT Test Setup. and we'll put a description in there that would be more descriptive depending on what sort of services you're putting together. And in this case we'll have SSH, which is a secure shell setup, and we will leave it as custom, which makes it available to the world. In reality, you would try to reduce what IP addresses can access your system. So in here I could say my IP and it would just use the IP of the computer that I'm on. Or if you had a domain where there's a range of IPs that you can work with that you would trust, you could put that range in here instead of the 000, which is open to all. And then we can say what that security group is for. So this is SSH for domain admins. If we wanted to set up our server to allow for a web service, we can also set that one up. So that will come in port 80 as opposed to port 22 for SSH. And we would probably want that open to the world. So this is HTTP for web server. Okay. Now you can see that this is giving us a warning about these IP addresses being open, and that's really not recommended. So this is just for demonstration purposes, but it is really important to make sure that you have your system locked down, and this is one of the easiest areas to do it. Okay, again, a warning about our test setup being open to the world. So you would need to change that in your settings. So we've chosen the image to work with. We've chosen specifications for our instance type. There was a lot of differences there in the size and the power of the servers we'd be working with. We've had the option to configure the instance and add storage. Then we have added tags so we can identify our instances and then set up the security groups so that we have specified what is able to connect to our instances. So this is the review, and if we're happy with the settings that we have, we can now launch our system. Now in this process we'll be setting up our key pair, and this key pair lets us connect to our server without having to use a username and password, and it's actually much safer, so it's using encryption for that. So we could use an existing key pair, or we can create a new key pair. Okay, so creating a new key pair, we'll give it a key pair name, and what will happen is when we click on the download, it will create a private key that will sit on our local machine that we're working on, and there'll be a public key sitting on our server. Once those two come together, that gives us authentication to be able to access the server rather than remembering yet another password. Okay, so I can download the key pair. I'll save that file, and you can see that it's saving to IoT Test Server 3. So I'll save that, and with that key pair created, we can actually launch the instance. Okay, so it's in the process of launching. We can look at the charges if we're using something that's not free. Okay, and with that we can view the instances and see how they're progressing. So I already have 2 instances running, and you can see that the new one is pending as it's setting itself up. So you can get some basic information about your server there. Okay, and it's now running, so we will be able to connect to it. So can click on connect to connect to our instance, and we'll get the information about how to connect. So we'll be using a standalone SSH client where I'm on a Mac machine, so I've got a terminal window that I'll switch to shortly. Or you could use a web browser version. With an SSH client, you might use PuTTY. It's fairly much the standard, and there's lots of information around about how to work with that. So what we need to do is to make sure that our private key is accessible, and then we'll be able to connect to our instance using this address. So I'll just copy this. This I can do at the command line on my Mac. So I can close that, and I'll switch to and I'll move the key that I downloaded. So move at the Linux command line. So that's my key that's in my home directory, and I'm going to move it to my current directory by putting a dot there. So if I do an ls now, you can see I've got a few of those. So IoT test server 3.pem is the private key which will allow me to access my instance without having to use a username and password. So I had copied the SSH command before. You can see that it's going to use my IoT test server 3 private key. I'll be logging on as user Ubuntu, and this is the address of our instance that we created. So we'll run this, and it's just checking that we're happy to connect to that host, and I'll say that I am happy to connect to it. Okay, permission denied because I have not yet changed the permissions on my key. So if I chmod 400, okay, so that changes the permission, so it means that it's protected from being read by people, other users on my machine and from the world. So I'm the only one that's able to access it with the 400 permissions. And if I try my connection again, we can see that we've got through now. Okay, so we had accepted access to that machine before, and now we are onto the machine, logged in as Ubuntu on the machine IP 172.31.9.13. So that's not my machine. I can check the date, and the date's a different day to where I am, so we're sitting in a data center somewhere else in the world. One thing that you need to be careful of when you're using cloud services is that when you shut down your virtual machine, it disappears. It's a bit like closing a program, and any data that's there can be lost. So it's an important thing to know how to back up and snapshot your system, and then you'll be able to stop the instance without losing all of your data. Any instance that you leave running is consuming resources. So we need to make sure that we're not paying for things that we don't need, that we've accidentally left running. And they're also a security risk. So anything that's accessible on the internet is at risk of being hacked. But if we just stop or terminate our instance without looking after our data, we might lose all of our data. So what we can do is take a snapshot and save the state of that image, and it's a good idea to run backups of your systems and transfer manually any important data. So looking at how we can do that, we've got our server that's up and running now, and we can look at the actions that we can take on that server. So it's running at the moment. It gives us the option of stopping, rebooting or terminating. So if I say stop, you can see that it's checking to see if we really want to do that because we will lose some of our data. So I'll cancel that and look at taking a snapshot of the system. Okay. So looking at our current system, we can create a snapshot of that to, so it's IoT Test Server 3. Give a name to that snapshot, and we'll give a date to that as well. And then we can save it. We can also put tags on this, so we can put a name onto that. and we can create a snapshot that gives us a snapshot of the current state of our system. So now we can be more comfortable that if we look at one of our instances, we can stop that and know that we have looked after the state of our system, and if we've been doing backups or file transfers to store our data, we'd be comfortable with this as well. So you can see that it's now stopping, and we can wait for that to stop, and then we're not using any more resources for that instance. Alright, and now it's stopped. So our last bit is to just talk a little bit about securing your instance. So security is not the focus of this unit, but it is important to know that you have to be the system administrator for your instances, and security is a major part of that. So as soon as you have your instance available, it is a target to hackers on the internet. So you need to make sure that you only have it running if you need it, and then when you're setting it up, only provide those security groups, so the SSH and the HTTP and other security groups, only provide the ones that you need. Once you have them, if they are ones that have privileges on your machine, you should be restricting the IP addresses, so giving as little access as possible to your system, so only allowing known hosts, so known IP addresses to connect. Those security keys, when you create your security keys, the public key is one that can be passed around, but the private key, you need to keep that safe. You need to know where it is, have the minimum number of copies in circulation, so that might be on your home machine or on a secured USB stick that you don't lose or leave unprotected. Any software that you install, you need to make sure it's secured. Most software that you install, if you look into it, it will have security information about it. So something that you could install is the software stack for providing a web server, and often that will come with a stack of software. So you need to set up and secure that software, including any database software, because databases are also commonly hacked into. Once the software is installed, you need to be making sure it's regularly updating, so that's the system software and any other software. So only install the software you need, so you don't have to worry about software updates that you're not caring too much about. And then have a look online. There are guides available for server hardening. What things do you have to fix as a priority to make sure that your server is safe? So you can look online for things like server hardening, so how to secure your instances, and most cloud services will have some recommendations there. So giving least access, that's the groups again, giving least privileges, also looking at what users have logins and what privileges they have, having a configuration that you can trust and you've tested, and using that on multiple machines rather than having a range of different things around. So anything that is different to your main configuration management, your baseline server, you should be giving good reason for that and testing that separately. Change management, so making sure any changes that happen to your systems, you know about them. That goes hand in hand with keeping things updated, and your audit logs will make it possible for you to know what changes have happened and trace back any issues. Then there's software installs, so you could install Apache Web Server, perhaps, just to have a web service available, or you can look at the LAMP stack, so Linux, Apache, MySQL and PHP. So that looks after having a backend that has a database and PHP, so you can code and program your web service. Then looking at how do you access your database, and you might use PHP MyAdmin to look after your MySQL database, and looking at, just for whichever machine image you choose, how you should be setting that up and how best to work with it. So our first step would be to rather than use the super user, the root user that we're using for Ubuntu, you would set up new users that have lesser privileges to run the services on the system. So we never want to be logging in as admin all the time. You can get those privileges when you need them, but retain security on your system more tightly by restricting those logins. So you've seen how to launch instances, put their settings together, manage them, watch them running, and connect to them in this tutorial. Thank you for watching this. I hope it helps you understand what to do, and you might have been able to follow on with your own web services setup. Please continue with the MicroMasters in IoT. Have a look around. There's a lot of resources on the internet for setting up servers and working with instances, and you can go in any direction from here. Thank you.